can't really contribute to the voice chats usually, so it's nice to speak to everyone. How are you guys doing?
That's cool. We are now live, by the way, just so that you're fully aware and there's no funny business.
Okay, cool. Thanks, man.
It's only you and I that can talk in this channel. Apart from mods, they can unmute themselves, but I don't think that's going to be necessary because we're not going to
No,
fight
man.
too
I think
much, are we?
people are pretty respectful. I don't think anyone's gonna speak over us and stuff.
All right, so I think the like just to get into it, maybe you had made a statement that let me just scroll up so I'm not saying anything that you didn't say. Right, I've got it on the screen now. It said, aside from those exceptions or things like hunting, I don't think civilians should own guns. Is that going to be what you want to stand by?
Yeah, man. So I would say there's some exceptions, things like hunting, where you could make a case where the gun ownership is for recreation or for survival. And there's also some self-protection situations, like for example, people who live out in the countryside where they don't live close to a police station. I can make a case for them having a gun because they might need to take protection into their own hands. All I'm saying is that even for those people who need guns, I'm okay with them having guns if a bunch of prerequisites are met. Things like mental health screenings, background checks, you know, repeated police checks on your weapon to make sure it's operational, things like that.
Okay, so it doesn't sound like we actually have a disagreement then, because I'm actually in favor of those things too. I'm not advocating for like let's willy nilly or give everybody firearms.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Can I ask
it
though, do you
yeah.
support people having like assault rifles and stuff like that? Because I don't. That's a big thing for me. I don't support people having like military sort of grade weapons.
And what would be a military grade weapon?
Um, I don't know the exact definition, man, but I would say any weapon where it's not really designed purely for self-defense, where it's designed for lethality and killing as many people in as quick of a period of time as possible. So any weapon with a large clip size, any weapon which can fire extremely quickly, any weapon like the AR-15, which is one of the most commonly used weapons in school shootings and
Hmm.
things like that.
So you're not concerned with caliber, you're concerned with the ability to get a lot of shots off quickly.
Yeah, that's one big concern, man. Because you can have a high caliber weapon like a sniper rifle, but there's a self-limiting feature on the sniper rifle. You can't fire that many rounds per second because a sniper rifle is not a machine gun, right? So even with a sniper rifle, as bad as I think it is, and I don't think civilians should own a sniper rifle, but as bad as I think it
I
is,
have
I
a
think
sniper
machine
rifle.
guns. Yeah, do you have it for hunting or
Do I have a what? Sorry.
for hunting, or do you have it for
Yeah,
protection? Or
because there is no such thing really as a sniper rifle. That's not actually a category of firearm.
oh, is that true? See, I don't know, man. When I talk about sniper rifles, I'm talking about the common conception of a sniper rifle, a long rifle with a scope that can shoot at really long ranges.
Yeah, I have one of those. Well, I
Okay,
actually have
but you have it for
two of
hunting,
those.
or
Yes, I do. Yeah.
okay, cool. So yeah, I would make that an exception. Like that would be an exception for me. I would say that purely for the purposes of hunting, I would say that would be okay. Now, I still don't think civilians should have those kinds of weapons at home because in a lot of school shootings, people steal weapons from their parents or someone else who legally bought the gun. So I don't think it's a good idea for people to have it at home. I think there should be regulations about that. But if you have it at a hunting lodge or if you keep it in a safe storage locker or something, yeah, I don't have much of an issue with that.
Okay, I think we're gonna have to unpack a couple of things here because I appreciate you live in Canada. I live in the UK, and I think the rules and regulations are probably quite a bit different. It is a legal requirement here that if you are to apply for a firearm certificate, which is for Section 1 firearms, we can get into what that means if you want to, but
Mhm.
you have to have appropriate storage, which is almost always going to be a gun safe.
Right. And that's a really sensible requirement. See, I wish they had something like that in the US because they don't. They don't have such a requirement in most of the US. You are allowed to buy guns. You can actually even buy guns without a background check and without a mental health screening. They do have background checks and they do have an FBI list which which keeps suspicious people on the list, kind of like the no-fly list. But there's a loophole. There's actually quite a few. The most well-known loophole, I did some research here, is something called the private sales loophole, which, and I'm quoting this over here. The private sales loophole allows purchases from a private seller, such as a friend or a family member, with no background checks. So this is how actually a lot of people, like convicted felons in the U.S., are able to get their guns. They don't buy the guns themselves
Yeah,
because
but
they have a criminal record.
aren't they at that point purchasing them illegally?
No, because the gun itself is legal because it was not bought by them. It would be illegal for them to buy the gun because if they were to buy the gun, they have a criminal record, so they would not be allowed to buy the gun. But because of the private sales loophole, it's considered a private transaction between two individuals, nothing to do with the state. So that's
What, and
basically
they're not required to register that firearm or have any background checks themselves just because it's secondhand?
based on what I'm reading here, man. No, but again, you could be right about that. Maybe they do, but yeah,
I,
over
I,
here
I
it's
think they do. I mean, yeah, like, yes, obviously, if you are the original purchaser of a firearm, of course, there's nothing physically stopping you selling that to someone else,
mhm,
obviously. But, I mean, you
yeah.
could apply that to anything. I mean, aren't they supposed to register that firearm and have it, like, on the books, as we say over here?
They might. I honestly don't know.
I
I
think
don't want to
they
sit here and
are,
give you a wrong answer. Yeah.
because,
I just know they can acquire the weapon, even if they're a convicted felon. I don't know what the rule is once they have the weapon, but I would say that honestly, if you're a convicted felon and you've already been in prison for a violent crime, is it really going to stop you or cause you cause for concern to have to register a weapon? Probably not. Like if you've already been in prison and stuff and you're already willing to buy a gun, you're probably not thinking about registering a weapon and stuff. Like that's things that law-abiding citizens like you and me would think about.
Yeah, that's true, but it's the same. You could apply the same thing to cars. You're allowed to sell a car to somebody who doesn't
Hmm.
have a driving license or insurance or anything like that.
Yeah, I would. The reason I think cars are a bit different, or even knives, because a lot of people. One of the
Well,
most
they
common
are
complaints.
different. I wasn't trying to say
Yeah,
that they're the same, but
yeah, no, no,
the
but it's a fully
principle is the
valid point.
same.
Yeah, and it's a super valid point because a lot of people say that when you take away the guns, criminals just switch to another form of weapon, like knives, and the knife violence rate goes up. So even though the gun violence rate goes down, the knife violence rate goes up, and that is true. There is a spike in the rate of violence with other means, but the overall homicide rate, which is the most accurate rate, still stays down because guns can cause a lot more death than knives or vehicles in a relative term, in terms of how much harm you can cause with one of those things. So I would still say it's a good thing. And I would also say it's difficult to really do much about vehicles because it's a conveyance. You can't really take away vehicles. People need to get to work and people need to
Yeah,
travel.
absolutely. I mean, like I say, I wasn't trying to say that they're the same kind of danger,
Hmm.
even
Hmm.
though it's actually a fact that more people get killed in car accidents than do by firearms, at least where I live. Now, it may not be true
Yep.
where you live, but like the principle of it is, like you were objecting to the second-hand sale of firearms, and you can apply this to, well, almost anything you want, actually. Once something becomes yours, you're allowed
Hmm.
to sell it on, but you're talking about people who are operating outside of the law. Because if you're selling a firearm to somebody who is not authorized to have that firearm, of course you can
Yep.
actually do that. You can take the money and you can give them the firearm, but they
Hmm.
are then outside of the law.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And that's why I think the private sales loophole in the US, I don't, to be fair, I don't think it exists in the UK. So I think the UK has a much more sensible set of laws. But I think the private sales loophole in the US should be closed. I don't think it should be legal for a private seller to just sell a gun, a weapon, to another person without the purchaser, having to do background checks and things like that.
Yeah, I
It
agree.
sounds like we both agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you're gonna have firearms, like the legal definition of firearm here has something slightly different to what it has over there, but we have weird laws. But yeah, I mean, you're right. We should make sure that people who are buying secondhand firearms, they have the appropriate checks, and that they're essentially, I'm just going to call it authorized from now on to
Mhm.
have such a firearm. But that doesn't speak to people not being allowed to have firearms in the first place.
Yeah, no, I'd agree, man. So can we move on to another point? Can I make
Yeah,
a different point now? Perfect. Thanks. So I did a bit of research before this debate. I can actually post my sources if you'd like. I know you can't read it like on the spot, like I'm not expecting you to, but just in
that's
case
fine.
you question just in case you question anything I say, I can post the source of anything I'm referencing. So in case you distrust anything, just let me know. I can post it. Okay.
I'll try my best
Um,
not to interrupt you, but go on.
Sure. So this is coming from Vox, and it's a study of gun control in
I
auto
already
and
have an
industrialized
objection.
countries. Just because it's
Vox.
Vox.
Well, I mean, come on, like Vox, you're gonna like have a serious debate on this topic, and you're gonna reference
Well, no. I mean,
Vox.
I'm saying the article was written on Vox, but the actual research comes from. Let me get this right. Harvard School of Public Health's Injury Control Research Center. So that's pretty legit. Like you have to admit, Harvard is a pretty legit institution,
Sure, go
right?
ahead.
Okay, cool. So, again, you don't have to outright trust anything. I'm sure some of this is because Vox is sort of opinion journalism, so I don't expect you to trust everything. Even I don't. So I think we're in agreement on that. But
Mhm.
here's a couple of things. This, and I'm quoting this from the article. The heaviest gun buying demographics are males, and the most likely demographic to inflict violence on others are young males between the age of 16 and 25. The legal age to buy a gun in most places in the US is 18, which falls right into this demographic. And in most of the cases, this is even before the legal drinking age. So basically, you can own a gun, you can actually even join the military and kill people before you'd legally be allowed to consume alcohol. And that seems like a really bad idea to me. The second point,
Well,
sorry,
do you
do you
mind? Do you
want to
mind
hear
if I
the first
speak
point?
to the first point? Yeah.
Yeah,
I
go
mean,
ahead.
it seems like a pretty backwards way of doing things, and I've always said the same thing about this. It does seem strange that you can buy a lethal weapon because guns of that caliber, they are potentially lethal before you're even allowed to buy a beer. I think all that speaks to is that the law is kind of backwards.
Yeah, and I would agree. So it sounds like we have agreement even on that. Um, so you would agree that 18-year-olds without mental health screenings and stuff should not be allowed to have guns. They're in the demographic most likely to inflict violence on other people, things like that, right?
Well, I mean, if they've been identified as likely to inflict violence on other people, then sure, of course. I mean, we
What if
actually
they don't?
have
Like,
those checks here
mhm.
where I live, and I've been through those checks, so I know what it's like to be checked for that.
When you got your gun, just out of curiosity, did they do a mental health screening, psychological evaluation, all that kind of stuff on you?
Yes, I have to go to the doctors every 5 years. Technically it's not a requirement under the firearms legislation in the UK, but for the sake of a quiet life and to have my license renewed every 5 years, I have to
Mhm.
go and have essentially a psychiatric evaluation. Yes, it's
Okay.
outside of the rules, but police forces here they tend to just do what they want, and it's easier to just go with it than oppose it. So yeah.
Okay. And did you have to take any tests on like marksmanship and how well you can shoot and things like that as well? I'm guessing.
Only for one of the calibers of rifle that I have, but that's specific to the UK. It's called a DSC certificate, which is, I'll just say it's anything from 223 above.
See, so I would be in support of a marksmanship test for any weapon because any weapon, any gun can kill, right? So why should that restriction only apply to a certain caliber of weapon and
It
not
it
all weapons?
shouldn't. It shouldn't apply to a certain caliber of weapon. I'm just describing how the law
Oh no,
is
no.
here
So
in the UK.
so you agree with that then?
Well, I don't agree that it should be for one specific caliber. No,
Right,
I think
right.
it's a
Okay.
bit of an all or nothing thing there.
Yeah, I would agree. So it sounds like we're in agreement about that. So let me move on to the second point. The second point is more guns generally correlate with higher levels of gun violence and a higher overall homicide rate. So the second sub point over here is that even when guns are removed, there is a spike in other forms of violence, such as knife crime. However, the overall homicide rate stays lower than it was, like, when guns were legal. Um, Let me see. I think I have some numbers if you'd like, but please, you can talk.
No, I just didn't really understand what the point was there.
Oh, it's pretty simple. More guns generally correlate with higher levels of gun violence. So the more guns you have in society, the higher generally the gun violence and homicide rate is. Here's the statistic. So one reason
Where
for
are
the
you
overwhelming.
posting it?
Oh, I'm sorry, I haven't posted it. Do you want me to post the thing? I can post it.
Yeah, I mean you can post it for later reference. It's just I'm not entirely convinced that that's true because
Sure,
I mean
sure.
I've got 6 rifles and I haven't killed anybody. So
No, no, no. Of course, yeah. But you're also on Discord and you're a pretty smart guy, so I wouldn't say that you're the average person. So, yeah, you know. One. So anyway, I'll move on with this. One reason for the difference is for the overwhelming amount of gun violence in America is the abundance of guns. According to a 2007 survey, the U.S. led the world in the number of civilian-owned firearms with 88.8 guns per 100 people. The second place was Yemen, all the way back at 54.8 guns per 100 people. So pretty big difference between first and second place.
yeah, but
Um,
why would you compare Yemen to somewhere like the United States? I
oh,
mean,
I
it's
wasn't. It was
very
just second
very
on the list.
different.
Yeah, it was just second on the list, man. Like I'm not going to talk about Yemen. I don't know enough about it either. So
Okay.
I just said it as a point of interest.
It
Um,
sounds to me like what you did was watch Vegan Gains debate on this, and you're just kind of parroting what he said.
Vegan Gains is pro-gun though, man. He's not anti-gun.
Yeah, I know he is. But
Yeah,
his
but I'm
his
anti-gun. So
opponent,
what's the issue with
what
Vegan
was
Gains?
their name? I forget who. Slightly crazy vegan. He debated her on this, and I watched that debate, and it just sounds a bit like you're saying the exact same things.
As slightly crazy vegan or Vegan Gains? Because Vegan Gains has the opposite position.
It's a little bit of both.
Oh, okay. I mean, I haven't seen it, but I mean, I have seen Vegan Gains recently posted a video because we had a shooting in Canada, a mass shooting in
Hmm.
Canada where 22 people died, and he was talking about how he disagreed with our Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for banning 1,500 assault type weapons. So, obviously, I
Yeah,
disagree
because
with banning
that
them.
doesn't actually have a definition unless you want to provide one. What is
Yeah,
the
no, no,
definition of an assault
I
type
don't.
weapon?
Yeah, I don't know enough about weapons, man. So I couldn't provide a good. You would know a lot more about weapons than I do, so I don't have a
Okay,
definition.
all right,
Um,
you carry
yeah.
on. It's just that you've been on the offensive for a bit, and that's fine. You can carry on.
Oh, sure, man. I mean, I'll just we can flip it as soon as this point's done.
Hmm.
You can go.
Yeah, no, take your
Yeah.
time.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find my place. Research compiled by the Harvard School of Public Health Injury Control Research Center has repeatedly found a link between a higher number of guns and higher levels of gun violence. A 2016 review of 130 studies in 10 countries found that legal restrictions on owning and purchasing guns tended to be followed by a drop in gun violence and the overall homicide rate. And that's my closing thing. And now you can go on the attack.
Okay, well, I actually have a question about that rather than going on the attack straight away. I mean, you could say that to just about anything, which is a point that I brought up earlier. I mean, if you ban knives, obviously you're gonna have less knife crime. If you ban cars, you're gonna have less car accidents. Why
Mm-hmm.
is the focus on guns?
The reason I would say the focus is on guns is because of just how much potential for rapid and lethal death there is. I've never heard of a knife crime where 100 people sort of died, like a mass knifing. But there was a mass gun incident, several, like in schools and stuff, where 50, 60, and in the Pulse nightclub shooting, over 100 people died, and that only happened because the guy had, rapid fire sort of weapons.
Right, so would you advocate then that anything that is potentially dangerous, or at least as dangerous as, say, a gun, just to put it in simple terms, would you say that those should not be in like civilian possession?
I mean, I would say it depends, right? Because I mean, if you mention things like vehicles and knives, it's kind of difficult to live really without those things because they're built into our lives as tools that we have to use. So it is a bit difficult. Like I would say anything which is sort of solely designed to cause death and injury should definitely be restricted.
But guns aren't solely designed to cause death and injury.
I would say things like assault weapons would be. I don't think that's
No,
even.
that's not true.
You think it's for self-defense? I don't really think
No,
it's for
no. I
self-defense.
mean, self-defense isn't classed as an acceptable like application to have a firearm certificate in the UK. Anyway, I think that was done away with in the late '80s. But if you have such a weapon, there's nothing to say that you have that weapon because you want to commit like harm or like mass murder or anything. You could just be a target shooter, for instance. And
Yeah,
what's the
yeah, you
harm in
could.
that?
Yeah, no, you could be completely innocent. I would say we should follow statistics. So, like for example, the AR-15 has been used in most of the recent modern school shootings and the Pulse nightclub shooting and the shooting from the hotel that killed like 50 or 60 people. Um, so I would say a weapon like that, there's a good case. So maybe we could. It would even be a case by case basis, where we looked at the weapons that caused the most violence or that were favored by people carrying out these shootings and ban those specific weapons or restrict those
Do you
specific
know
weapons.
what the difference is between automatic and semi-automatic?
No, man, I don't. Is it just the fire rate or?
Well, kind of. It's the fire rate, but it's the mechanism. It's usually done by blowback mechanism. Fully automatic is where you just keep your finger on the trigger and it keeps firing. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
semi-automatic, well, until your magazine runs out, obviously. But semi-automatic is you have to squeeze the trigger every single time, but you can do that super, like, really, really quickly. I mean, I've got one, it's the only caliber that we're allowed in the UK, which is even allowed to be semi automatic, because fully automatic is banned anyway. And I can
Mm-hmm.
empty a 10 round magazine in under 10 seconds.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, sounds like you're pretty skilled, man. I mean,
Well, no, I
that's
mean,
that is pretty quick.
you could be shooting at anything. It doesn't matter how good a shot you are. This is about how many rounds you can get off in what amount of time. And it's
Mm-hmm.
literally as fast as you can move your finger towards the trigger.
So it's still slower than holding down the trigger on an automatic weapon, though, right?
The difference is very negligible.
Oh, there's not much
There's
difference.
almost nothing in it.
Oh, okay. See, I didn't know that, man. So, like, I don't know enough about the mechanisms of these weapons to talk about them specifically. I'm just going by sort of statistics and stuff that I can find. Like, I've never actually even owned a gun, so I don't know enough about them. But
Okay, but you're
yeah, if
opposed to
there's not
people
much of a
owning them
difference,
anyway.
sorry.
You're opposed to people owning them anyway.
I'm okay with people owning them if they meet all the other standards. Like if they meet all the aggressive standards of mental health screenings, background checks, a vision test, a marksmanship test, all of that. You know, police checks on the weapon to make sure that it's in good condition, things like that.
Even if all those conditions were set, I mean most of them are anyway, apart from the marksmanship test. But even if all those conditions were satisfied, there wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
be anything preventing somebody who passed all those tests from going out and killing someone, would there?
No, no, it just makes it less likely. Nothing 100% guarantees it. So I know that it's not a perfect solution. It just you know, it's the best solution I can think of. It's the best solution I think society can think of. If you have a better idea on
Solution to what
then yeah.
problem though? Because I'm
People
confused as to what your objection really is. Because it sounds like we agree on most of it.
Yeah, we do, which is why this is like kind of I guess not a true debate because we agree on so much of it. I would say it's a solution to things like what's happening in the U.S., the gun violence rate, and people going out on mass shootings, going out on killing sprees, shooting up hotels, shooting up schools, things like that. I don't think it happens in the UK that much, to be fair.
It doesn't because our regulations over here are super duper strict, like really really strict.
Mhm.
I think apart from China, we've got the most strict firearms regulations on the planet.
Mhm.
Apart from like maybe some like unregulated places, which of course we're not more strict than. But
Right.
I don't understand the objection to civilian firearms ownership.
Yeah, I would say it's
Because
pretty
you've
easy.
already agreed. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. It's just that I haven't finished. I needed to breathe in. But
Sure.
you like you were objecting to civilian firearms ownership, with a couple of exceptions that you already granted. So I'm just wondering, like, okay, would it be nice if we didn't have mass shootings? Well, yes, of course it would, like of people. But banning firearms outright for civilian ownership, that's not going to achieve that either, because people who are determined to do that anyway, they're going to get hold of firearms regardless.
Yeah, no, and that's true, man. You'll never solve 100% of the problem, but that doesn't mean we don't try and solve what we can, you know?
Yeah, I'm not saying, look, we can't stop all of it, so let's not bother stopping, trying to stop any of it. Like that's not the angle that I'm coming from. It's just, I just, I'm not clear as to what your fundamental objection is. It sounds like you're actually okay with it.
Well, I mean,
The ownership, that is, not the mass shootings, obviously.
yes, yes, yeah, of course. I mean, it sounds like from what you're telling me about the UK, they don't have a lot of school shootings. The laws are pretty strict, but people still have the right to have guns, kind of like how you have guns right now, right?
We don't
Um,
have. I just want to clear that up. Sorry, I know I'm chopping in on you, but it's quite important. We
no,
don't
no, please go ahead.
have the right to have guns. You have to apply to have guns. It's not. We
Right.
don't have the like the right to bear arms thing in the Constitution like they have in America or something.
Okay, I see. I see your point. Yeah. So I should say it's not the right to have a gun, but it's if you go through the required process, you can have a gun in the US, right? Sorry, in the UK.
Yes, that's
And
correct. Yeah.
I'm in support of that. Like, if you guys are not having negative consequences like school shootings, if you're not having a ridiculously high homicide rate like the US has, then obviously what you're doing is working, and the US should emulate what you guys are doing.
Can I
You know?
chime in?
Um.
Sorry, who?
Well, hang on just a second. Let's just finish this, and then if sorry, I forget what you
Oh,
changed your
perfectly
name
fine,
to.
man.
If when Genius Failed wants to, he can take questions from other people. Because I don't think we need to like harp on about this so much. It sounds like we agree on most things.
Hmm.
So yeah, I mean, like my position is that if you pass certain checks, like if you can qualify yourself as somebody who is suitable, because that's the kind of criteria that we have here to have firearms. Let's not get too deep into calibers and magazine capacities because I don't think it's too relevant.
Right.
Then yes, you should be allowed to have them, and I don't think you even disagree with that. I was expecting a slightly different angle from you, but you go
Mm.
ahead. Your mic.
No, I think you're right on that, man. I don't really disagree with that. When I look at gun violence, I think the most interesting country to look at gun violence is the US because they're just so off um, the graph compared to every other country, right? And then the other country I like to look at is countries like, sensible countries where the homicide rate is under control. And then I basically look at what are those countries doing, the ones that have gun violence sort of under control, which it sounds like the UK is one of those countries. And how could we apply those principles to the US to reduce their gun crime rate? Um, and it sounds like we agree on a lot of it. So we agree on, background checks should happen, psychological, mental health screenings should happen, marksmanship tests should happen. So all of those things, I think we do agree on. Um, yeah, I would agree. I think we agree on most of the prerequisites to having a gun.
Yeah, okay. So I don't really see anything that's particularly contentious here to debate. I think we just sort of agree on sensible measures for sensible people being able to own firearms. I mean, is that a fair statement?
Yes, no, I would completely agree with that. And it sounds like it sounds like we both agree on that, right? So um I think it sounds like as long as like it sounds like you're not so pro gun that you just believe in like the US system where you can sort of have a gun even if you're a convicted felon, you can kind of get your hands on a gun.
No,
That
not at
that was
all.
my
I think sensible measures should always be taken. I think the UK takes it a bit too far, but I mean that would be like entire in-depth discussion for me to rant on about what I think the problems are with the firearms laws in the UK. But
Mhm.
in general, yeah, I think we pretty much agree. So
Yeah, and the only reason I clarified that, SD, is because I have spoken to some people. Actually, funnily enough, Sid is one of them, where he said in Islam, it's every I don't know if this is true or if he was joking or not, but he said every Muslim should have a gun so that they can
oh
exact
yeah,
vengeance.
that was last
Should
night. I'm not sure if that's true either. Sid likes to joke sometimes.
Yeah, so it's I have interacted with people like that. I've also interacted with people from the US where they say even if you're a convicted felon, it's your God-given right to have a gun. It's written into the Constitution. It doesn't matter if you're a felon. It doesn't matter if you have mental health problems. It is your right under the Constitution to have a gun.
That's
Regardless of.
true.
Yeah, yeah, and it's stuff like
Yeah.
that I disagree with. But it
So
doesn't
so
sound like you
just
or me.
just before we like, I mean, have you got like a few minutes? Maybe I think there's some other people
Yeah,
in the chat who want to ask you some questions. I doubt many of them are for me, so I'm gonna just step away and get a glass of water. But if you're okay with taking questions, anybody, are you okay with taking questions?
yeah, absolutely.
All right, that's cool. Thank you very much. Anybody who wants to speak, you're going to have to be unmuted by a mod. Just post in the general chat and somebody will unmute you so you can ask your question. Thank you.
Thanks.
Hey, when genius failed. I have a couple of questions for you. Just so you know, I am an
Sorry, who's
American.
speaking?
Do not own
Sorry.
a firearm.
I'm sorry, man. Who's speaking? Just so I can.
Ethical veganist or dread cassowary or whatever.
Ethical veganist, aka
Oh,
Dread.
perfect. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, man.
I do live in America. I do not own a firearm.
Hmm.
But there are a lot of information that you were talking about is very inaccurate,
Hmm.
specifically about our gun violence rate and weapons that cause the most death, and more importantly, can felons own firearms? Turns out most states you're not allowed to own a firearm if you're a felon. There's one state that allows that. Like there are a couple that if you do certain things, you may be able to own a firearm later if you've shown to have been reformed.
Hmm. Oh, sorry.
So
Are you?
that is that's a piece of knowledge that hope correct your just to correct your information.
Yeah.
Also, can you define for me what an assault weapon?
No, I can't. I don't have any specific information on weaponry. I did about 35 minutes of research before this debate because this was an informal debate, so I cannot
Oh,
define that for you.
it's
SD
okay.
can
No,
probably
no, it's
define.
okay. It's okay. It's all right. I'm not trying to. I'm not actually trying to attack you here. The problem is the term assault weapon has no meaning at all. There is no
Hmm.
such thing as a assault weapon. It's a political
Yep.
point that politicians use here.
Yep.
There's literally no definition for it. Do you want to know
Hmm.
what the firearm type that causes the most death across the world?
The AK-47.
Incorrect.
Okay, what is it?
Handguns.
But that's not a specific gun. Like I thought you were
No,
asking about.
it is a weapon type because you said that you wanted to ban things like the AR-15 because they were used in some school shootings,
Hmm.
but those aren't causing the majority of the deaths. It's being done by handguns.
Yeah, but the problem is, man, I can make an argument for why handguns should be allowed, particularly in rural states, like because of self defense and things like that. Especially in states that have concealed carry and things like that. You like a handgun is, falls under those legislations. Like an AK-47, I would not say falls under self defense.
Oh no, why not? Why wouldn't it fall under self-defense?
What do you mean? Because it's
Well, okay, a handgun and an
how is that self
AK-47.
defense? Like unless you're in the military.
Why? In the end, more people are illegally killed by handguns than rifles by a
Yeah,
long shot.
here's the thing, man. I agree with you on that, but the problem is, what do you want me to do about that? I can't do anything when people need those weapons for self-defense. Like, I agree with you; it's not a good thing, but like, I don't know what you
Well,
like.
say
Unless
it,
you have
but
a
you
solution. If you have a solution, I'd be happy to put it in place, but I can't think of one.
you said you like to work by statistics, right?
I mean, because that's to be completely honest, it's because that's all I have that I'm
No,
able to understand. I don't understand all the
fair.
nuances of the weapons. So
Did you find the statistics released by the CDC on how many lives were saved by fire?
No.
It outstretches the deaths by firearms by a factor of 100. It was estimated that in 2016, 500,000 people had their lives saved for the legal use of a firearm.
And wait, sorry, can you repeat that? I didn't quite get that.
Estimated in 2016, so about 4 years ago. No real reason to assume things have changed that much.
No. That's relatively recent. Yeah, go on.
That 500,000 people here in the States were saved by the legal use of firearms.
Yeah, I don't quite believe that, man.
Well, I'm sorry.
I mistrust that.
The problem.
I mean, I'm not gonna say outright that I don't believe that because I haven't read it. But
I mean, again, if you want to go around telling other countries how to act, I suggest you know your statistics. And those are the
I would agree,
statistics.
man.
Now,
Look, seriously, what is your sort of threshold here? Because this is a debate that if you scroll up the chat, like seriously, this was just planned spur of the moment, last minute. Like this is not a formal debate, and I don't do this full time. Neither does SD, as far as I know. Like I don't know why you're like sort of your standards are so ridiculously high. Like if you wanted to debate, you can debate.
Genius failed. While I was listening to you, a lot of the information that you had was inaccurate. I'm trying to correct the record. That's all.
Let me just post the information, and then people can decide whether it's accurate or not. If you don't like it, you don't like it. Like, I mean, I can't do anything about that, right? It's not. It's just the information I found half an hour prior to this thing. I'm not saying that all the information on it is correct.
My dude, I am not attacking you. I am merely correcting the record. Okay, you are working off of false information. I am telling you that you need to do more research if you want to maintain this position, because right now you're not being told the truth. Okay, and you're not talking the truth either. Because the funny thing is, when you talk about, oh, America's gun violence problem is so bad, it's so bad compared to everyone else in the world. I think the People's Democratic Republic of the Congo has a gun violence problem far worse than ours. I think Mexico has a far worse gun problem.
Okay, if that's true, then that would definitely conflict with the information I have here, because that is not at all what I have here.
The Congo is currently embroiled in a civil war.
Yep.
And you're saying that America has a worse gun problem.
I'm not saying that. The articles I've read are saying that. I'm not saying that. I'm just quoting what they're saying. I'm not making any claims.
I'm just trying to impress upon you, for a nation that is embroiled in a civil war, having problems with gun violence greater than America. I really think you need to just stop, pause, and think, how is that even possible without America literally depopulating itself in a month?
Yeah, I'm not saying it is, man. I'm just saying I haven't read it. I'm not saying that it isn't.
The other thing is, gun violence also heavily depends on where you are in the country. If you are in the inner city poor areas, it's going to be bad. But it's the same with, say, London and machete attacks. Or if you're in Sweden and hand grenade attacks. If you are out in the suburbs, or if you are out in the rural areas, we have the same gun violence as Switzerland, which is to say virtually none. Also, places that have more gun ownership have less crime. So all of the places that people say have the worst gun violence, New York, LA, Chicago, Baltimore, Detroit, they all have the highest levels of gun regulation. They have it more serious than most places here.
Wait, when you say most places, do you mean most other states, or do you mean most other countries? Because there's a big difference.
They have all of these places with the most restrictive gun restrictions in the country. And some places in other nations have far worse gun violence than places that don't have those restrictions.
Okay, I mean, I'll just have to take your word for it, man, because, like, I don't know.
Okay,
like,
I think what we should do, like, thanks for the question, Dred, but did anybody else have a question for When Genius Failed, also known as Artemis? If you do, then just, like, ping me in general chat, and I can unmute you, and you can ask him a question.
How did this start? Was this like a sorry, I was just gonna say, how did this start? Was this just like a
It was a
Ha-
spur of the moment kind of debate, basically, Patty. It was SD posted an announcement, I think it was yesterday, saying, "Does anyone want to
mm,
debate me on gun control?" I think Sid D. Slicer said he would, but then he says, "I'll debate you on it, but I don't really actually hold the position of being anti-gun." And then I said, "SD, if you want to debate someone who's um, sort of genuinely more anti-gun than pro-gun, I'm available." And then it kind of went from there.
okay. Well,
Yep.
I'm a Second Amendment absolutist, so I don't believe in a constitutional restriction on
Mm-hmm.
anyone who served their time even on gun
Mm-hmm.
rights, or even if they are quote unquote mentally ill or whatever. I also don't support red flag laws, but I was going to say, I think what Cassowary is trying to get across to you is that he is right. Like we actually don't have like this extreme homicide rate. You repeated homicide rate quite a few times, and I mean even as a whole country,
Mm-hmm.
um, we actually have a lower homicide rate than the country of Russia, which is far bigger than ours, and our
Mm-hmm.
country is far bigger than the UK, than France, and so it's not surprising that we would have a larger rate of homicides,
Yeah.
but usually people don't actually complain about our homicide rate because we've actually been going down as years go
That,
on.
that is that is true, by the
Um,
way. It is trending down. I
right,
would agree with that.
right, and so most of the problem is that you look at our country and say, look, our homicide is going down. Why are mass shootings happening? And I think that's the real question. Why are mass shootings happening? And I don't think that mass shootings are happening because people have access to weapons. I think that mass shootings happen for other reasons rather than the fact that we have access to weapons.
Hmm. Things like
Gun
mental
laws
health
here
and
are
stuff,
not
I'm guessing.
right. Yeah, mental health is a huge one actually.
Hmm.
But
Yeah.
like we do not. You'll notice that majority of people who have engaged in mass shootings,
Hmm.
they've shown previous behavior, previous concerning behavior, and
Yep.
red flag laws won't fix that because red flag laws are actually unconstitutional.
Sorry. Well,
The
what are
idea
red flag laws exactly? I don't actually know what that is.
So red flag laws are basically if you made a Facebook, say you make a Facebook post and the Facebook post seems weird to someone, someone can call the authorities, and the authorities can come and check on you, and the authorities can say, in our opinion, you look like a danger to society or whatever, and so we're going to take your weapons, and you can only get them through a judge.
Hmm.
This is unconstitutional because in order for your constitutional rights to actually be revoked in that way, in which you have to stand before a judge, you should at least have your Fifth Amendment rights. So that is the right to a trial, and that's
Right.
not what standing in front of a judge is.
Hmm. So it sounds
Yeah,
like it's a list of sort of suspicious people who could have the potential for violence. Am I getting that right?
not so much a list, but more so that a simple civilian can call in and say that they think that you're a danger to others.
Okay.
Can I chime in on that?
Sure.
Okay, the way the red flags are supposed to work is it's supposed to alert the police to a situation where somebody may have an issue that could potentially drive them to cause murder. It's basically one of the responses to the overly politicized mass shootings. Basically, anybody can call the police, say this person said some crazy stuff, or this person makes me nervous. They are then immediately added to a list, and all of their property, aka their firearms, is confiscated without a trial, without due process, without anything. And pretty much every red flag law that's ever gotten to the courts has been thrown out vigorously by the court because it's a violation of Amendment 2 and Amendment 5. So they basically the issue with them is anyone can literally say this person makes my willy hurt, and then your guns will be confiscated.
Okay. I think. I mean, I'll have to read up more on it, man. Like, I'm. It sounds like, yeah. I mean, I think I get the gist of it. in my head, I was thinking it sounded a bit like the no-fly list, except for guns instead of people who can't fly on
Yeah.
airlines.
Well, to be fair, the no-fly list is also unconstitutional. That's been
Mhm.
something that's been brought up to our Supreme Court um, before. No-fly list is basically government surveillance on you, and the government decides that they think that you're a weird person, so they're not going to let you fly. And in fact, this happened to a couple of regular civilians in which they tried to get on a plane and they were told that they were on a no-fly list. They will get interrogated for hours,
Mhm.
and then and they would have to go through some sort of judicial process in order to get it removed, despite the fact that they didn't go through a judicial process to end up on the no-fly list in the first place. So, yeah, it's kind of like it's a cluster f of weird ass things that the government imposes on people.
Right, right, yeah. Sorry, I had some point to make. What was it? I think it was
Oh, did
something.
I also mention that I'm okay with so-called mentally ill people having guns?
Really? See, that's interesting. Why is that?
Because the concept of mental illness changes all the time. So, for example, it used to be called mentally ill if you were homosexual. Um, they used to have gender dysphoria as a mental illness, and it's actually not classed as a mental illness anymore on the DSM-5.
Right.
So the concept of like mentally ill and what constitutes a sane person seems to have always changed. That's why it's like so freaking hard for someone to use an insanity defense within court, because the idea of you being just so messed up out of your mind is
Mhm.
so rare. It can't even be used in court all that often. So, for example, like some people consider mentally ill, that mentally ill is often like this generalized term. So, for example, people with chromosomes disorders such as
Down
Down
syndrome and
syndrome
stuff.
people.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so Down syndrome people can live within society. A lot of Down syndrome people are high functioning and can
Hmm.
live within society perfectly fine, have jobs, have children, and be able to. And autistic people as well, autistic Asperger's, even some of them who are a little low functioning, they can do all those things and be welcome, influential members of society who just need a little bit of help.
Hmm.
And if our Constitution says that we're all under the same guidelines, regardless of our abilities or how we look, if you're a human being, you are protected by the Constitution.
Hmm.
You wouldn't deny those same people the right to trial. You wouldn't deny those same people their First Amendment rights. Why
Hmm.
deny them the right to a self-defense and a firearm? Besides our personal biases of what constitutes mental illness or what constitutes a person who is able-bodied or anything like that.
Right. I think that's a good point, particularly when you use people like Down syndrome and stuff as an example. Can I ask though, what would your line in the sand be? What would the threshold be where that specific mental illness you would say, okay, fine, we shouldn't give people with that illness a gun, access to a gun.
So obviously, there are people in which we have guardianship over, especially those. And I'm sorry if you hear like something that sounds like rain. I'm from.
No, no, it's cool.
So like, yeah. So
Is it
obviously, there are
onions?
people. No, it's not onions. It's chicken this time.
Okay, go ahead.
Fried chicken, the ultimate stereotype for black people. um, that was a terrible. So like obviously there are people in which you have guardianship over, and I think that people should use their best judgment. So you wouldn't give a gun, you wouldn't give your personal gun to someone who hits themselves with a wooden mallet and goes doo doo da da, and they're 24
Hmm.
years old, right? You
Hmm.
know, and it's the same, it's the same thing with issues such as people who are schizophrenic and all that stuff. You wouldn't give them a firearm. It should be their right if they chose to pursue to get a firearm. But you should, in my opinion, you should be so active within your family and the family members who are mentally ill that you should be aware that they have access to that, and you should be willing to take the stand to separate themselves from that or prevent them from um, and this is where like I think guardianship is it can be a good thing and stuff like that. But even schizophrenic people, uh, can be classed as totally sane within a court of law, right? Because they're on their medication and they're doing this and doing that. I think it's people who should have the best judgment, and the communication with their family members rather than government determining who can and cannot access constitutional rights.
So I do agree with that. That family should sort of be looking out, for a family member who's suffering from mental illness like that. What would you say in the case of somebody who's like in foster care? They've been aged out of the system. They're now 21, 22, and they don't have someone who cares about them, or is looking after what they do. What's the restriction on them in that case? Like, who's imposing the restriction on them in that case?
No one.
Well, they should. So, right, no one. And my point still stands. They should not be restricted from their constitutional rights. If they maybe there's a community who rallies around them. These are things that simply should just be encouraged within society. A rallying of community and people checking on their neighbors and things like that. We don't do that anymore. We definitely should start doing that again. But you know I'm just very, very cautious about the idea. If government can restrict one person
Mhm.
from doing something because of maybe a government official's personal biases or whatever, then that means there is no restriction for the government doing it to anyone else. The mental health issue is almost irrelevant to the concept of constitutional rights and the equality of all people within a society that abides by constitutional rights.
So, if I may chime in,
Yeah,
when Genius Failed asked, where do you draw the line in the sand? I personally draw the line in the sand at the point where by your own action, you have suspended your constitutional rights, and that means the moment you become a criminal, the moment you commit a crime, is the moment that you no longer should be allowed to hold a firearm.
that's a good
However,
point.
when you have paid your debt to society, which is you have gone through whatever punishment that the state deems necessary, it no longer has burden upon you. The state no longer has the right to say you can't have anything because you've repaid your debt to society.
I would
Exactly.
agree with you on
Same.
the first part, that you only lose the right after you've committed a criminal act. I would disagree with you on the second. I think after a person has killed someone and they're a convicted felon now, even if they have repaid their debt to society via prison time or rehabilitation or whatever, I don't think they should be allowed access to a gun again.
Well, the good news
So
for
here's
you
what.
is
Oh,
that
go
most
ahead.
people who commit murder go away for life.
No, not always. There was Ethan Couch who killed four people in a drunk driving accident, and he was out in like 2 years. There was
Whoa,
Brock
whoa,
Turner who raped a woman, and he was out in like 6 months.
drunk driving. That wasn't that. That's drunk driving. That's a very different circumstance.
Okay, Brock Turner raped, like he was out in 6 months.
Okay, but he didn't kill anyone with a gun. He didn't kill anyone.
No,
It's not.
it's not my point. Oh my god, dude, you're so pedantic. There's no
So
point talking to you.
so
Sorry, but
hold on
law.
before a fight breaks out.
No, I'm
Let
not
me
engaging
offer
with him anymore,
something.
Patty. I'll engage with you and SD
I
because at least
understand.
you're being fair and you're kind of engaging with me reasonably charitably. Like that guy's not even being fair. Whoever he is.
That's fine. I just don't want to fight to break out, so I'm gonna just kind of step in and separate you guys just real quick. So let me like raise an idea for you. I've been watching a really good documentary about young people who end up incarcerated for and they get life sentences, but in 2002, it was 2012 maybe.
Mm,
Um, it was declared unconstitutional that you could not incarcerate a minor, um, or give them a mandatory life sentence. Not you can incarcerate them, but they can't have a mandatory life sentence. Um, Psychologists would get on the stand and they would explain you're not the same person as you were 12 that you are at 20. You are a
right.
completely different person at that point. And a
Hmm.
lot of these kids ended up murdering someone.
Hmm.
They reach the age of 25, 20, and 30, and they're a completely different person with a totally new outlook, despite being growing up in prison, literally growing up in prison.
Yep.
Um, I can't say that when they get out of jail, after they once they do good behavior and they get off parole, I can't say that they shouldn't be allowed the right to purchase a firearm. there's nothing really there's nothing really that stands in the way at that point of repaying their debt to society, repaying for that punishment of the terrible thing that they did.
Hmm.
And the question is after that, if you can tell someone that they can't have a constitutional right, and it's not just the right to a firearm that they're not allowed to have, they're not allowed to vote either. You know, if you're not allowed to vote, which are constitutional rights, and you're not allowed to have firearm, who's to say that you're not allowed to have a speedy trial? Who's to say you're not allowed to have your Fifth Amendment rights anymore, or your
Hmm.
First Amendment right? You're an ex-con, you're a felon, and you
Yep.
can't even get the right to vote. Do you get what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. And with things like the right to vote and stuff, I think you make a really good point. For me, if you're an ex-con who's committed something like murder or assault or something like that, you have eroded trust to the point where I don't think we should trust you, even after you've repaid your debt to society. In terms of giving you a gun, now we should trust you again in terms of giving you the right to vote and non-harmful things like that. But when it comes to the gun, I still don't see it.
So, did you know theft is a felony offense in the United States, right? So, grand larceny is a felony offense.
No, I actually didn't
That's
know that. I don't know the U.S.
yes.
laws as well as Canada's because I don't live in the U.S.
Okay, so depending on the state, grand larceny, over 300, maybe 500, sometimes $1,000,
Hmm.
then it becomes a felony. And a felony at that point is something on a federal level. That's when you've not only pissed off the state, but you've pissed off the federal government.
Right.
Those people who, once they get out, they might be convicted to 5 to 10. Once they get out, they're not allowed to own a gun. Are you okay with that?
So you said it starts if they just steal something worth over $300. Like there was no violence committed. There was no
Yeah.
like
So
they don't
say
even have to have a weapon
yes.
present.
So right. So say right. It's essentially it's not harmless, but nobody gets hurt.
Right.
Someone breaks into a music store and
Hmm.
they steal a bunch of equipment.
Hmm.
If they get caught, that's going to be grand larceny, and they're going to go away for 5 to 10 years.
Yeah.
And not only that, but once they get out, they won't have the right to vote or own a firearm.
Yeah. No. In that case, I would say I would agree with you. I'm not okay with that because they haven't actively committed violence against someone. So I would probably maybe amend what I said to violent felons or ones who committed some crime like assault or murder or something like that.
So, do you believe that violent felons can change?
I think they can, but I still think we should take precautions and not trust them when it comes to weapons like guns. So I still, as much as I trust them, that's one thing I would not trust them with. I would trust them
Okay,
enough to give them
I
back
get.
their right to vote and things like that, though.
Well, why, if you wouldn't trust them with a firearm, why would you trust them to vote? I mean, they
But
could vote
the
for
reason
someone
is
who.
because I think it's actually built
Well,
into
hold
your
on, hold on.
constitution, right?
I was.
That they have to be able to vote.
Yes, but so is the Second Amendment.
Hmm.
That's the problem. Do you get the so when you have a constitutional right to vote and a constitutional right to free speech or a constitutional right to a firearm, but you're convicted of something, and the only things that you're not allowed to have constitutionally back
Hmm.
is your right to vote or firearm,
Yep.
what makes voting different from your right to a firearm?
I would say like you have had amendments to your constitution, right? It's not completely intact, right? Like you have had a
You
couple of amendments to the constitution, right?
we've So we have about I can't remember like the exact number, but they can be added and taken away. It's very, very hard. It likely will not happen anytime soon.
Right, right.
But
But there are
yeah.
amendments, which means that it's not completely fixed in stone. So this is one of the things where I would say it should be modified. Like I think the right to vote is non-harmful. You're not killing anyone by voting whichever candidate, even if you vote for Trump, which most people probably on here don't like Trump. You're not actively committing violence and killing anyone with that action. With a gun, I
Well,
would
I
be
don't
very
know.
nervous
I
about
don't know.
a violent ex felon
Well, I
having a
don't know.
gun.
People have voted in people who go on and do complete mass genocides.
Yeah,
I mean, who's to
yeah.
say that a felon is not going to vote for someone who's a hardcore racist and wants to genocide
Mhm.
other people? Why should we trust them with that kind of power?
The reason is because I don't believe in guilt by that. I think it's called the guilt by association fallacy. Just because you vote for someone who has those views doesn't mean you're condoning every violent thing that they did. I don't believe that the people who voted even for Hitler necessarily thought that he was going to, like, concentration camp and kill 6 million Jews and things like that. Like, even if they voted for Hitler, doesn't mean they accepted the
Sure.
fact that they were killing 6 million Jews.
Sure, but you understand the power associated with voting then, yeah?
Yep, I do.
Even if someone thinks that it's very mundane, there is obvious power
There is.
to
There is.
voting, just like there's just like there's power to owning a firearm. So
Yep.
I get what you mean, and I respect your views on this. I get what you mean. I do disagree with you, but I totally get what you mean. I get why you have those views. I do think that they make sense. I just disagree.
Yeah,
Right?
and honestly, it's a gray area, Patty. Like, I could very easily change my opinion on this. This is just my views as of right now. I could very easily
Yeah.
switch, like 3 months from now, based on
Yeah.
something you've said. I could change my opinion. These are just my views as of
Yeah,
right now. You know?
right, totally understandable. I encourage you to look at recidivism rates, which is the rates in which people go back and like do the same crime for the
Yep.
thing that they got in trouble for before. And then I encourage you to go and look at some documentaries about young felons
Mhm.
who ended up in jail because of murder or whatever, murder, rape at as young as 12 to 15 years old, and now they're a completely different person in prison, according to psychologists anyway.
Mhm.
And just kind of look into that and see see if your views on them change. Should they be allowed all of their constitutional rights back and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it was
Yeah,
nice
absolutely.
talking to you.
Listen,
I'm gonna be quiet now.
if you can link me to anything, I'd be grateful for that. Like, I'm always open to reading or watching
Do
these
you have
documentaries and
Hulu?
stuff. Sorry?
Do you have Hulu?
I can get it. Like, it's not much of a problem. Like, I can get it pretty easily. I have Netflix.
Oh, okay. Well, Netflix might have some stuff about young cons, but Hulu has a really good documentary called I forgot exactly what it's called, but I'll send it to you.
Yeah.
It's just really young people who ended up in prison for horrible offenses,
Mhm.
and
I,
they were
I
able to get their mandatory, huh?
I was saying I have no problem looking at it and revising my position. Like, I could very easily change my opinion on this in like a few months. I don't
Yeah.
even mind the disagreement with you and SD, because you guys make really good points. I do mind people like Dread, where they're literally just attacking and being as uncharitable, and they're not steel manning my position. They're straw manning
Yeah.
everything I say.
Okay,
And I don't like that.
I get you. That's fair enough.
Yeah.
And even when I was bringing up the homicide rate, and whether or not you think it's a relevant rate, that's fine. You can disagree. But if I'm bringing up the homicide
Right.
rate, don't bring up the Congo, which is undergoing a civil war. That's not a fair comparison to the US and Canada and the UK, which are the countries we're talking about, rich, industrialized countries that have their stuff together. That's not a fair comparison. That's like me bringing up 1945 Germany as a comparison. Of course, that's not a fair comparison, right? Like, if he thinks he actually scored a point there, that's not a point, man. Like, I don't mind losing a point. Like, I'm okay with it. If SD wins a point on me, that's fair. I'll concede it because they're intelligent and we're speaking. Like, this is a conversation. You're going to lose some, you're going to win some.
Absolutely.
I don't concede that. I don't
that.
concede to Dread.
Sorry. No, that's fine. Not an issue at all.
Yeah.
How much
And,
time
Yeah,
do you
it's
have
okay.
left?
Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to, because he was going on about the Congo and stuff, right?
Yeah,
And,
you can complete your point, of course.
It'll be really quick.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, no,
I just
take
wanted to
as much
go
time as you
on-
want.
So,
Yeah.
just some statistics I found. They might be wrong. Again, like I said, this was literally a spur of the moment debate. SD can testify to that, so I'm not lying about that.
Mhm.
Everybody can look at the chat. Everybody can testify to that. This is not something we prepared for super well. So this is a spur of the moment thing. So these are the statistics I found in half an hour of researching. So United States gun ownership rate was 88.8 guns per 100 people. The homicide rate was 29.7 per 1 million people. So it doesn't sound too bad, but I'm always looking at it in a relative sense. So just to give you a comparison, so United States 29.7 per 1 million people is the homicide rate. Keep that number in mind. In Canada, there is 5.1 per 1 million people. So it's the very next country. So you can see how big the statistics change, even just one country over. In the United Kingdom, it's actually really low. It's 0.7 per 1 million people. And in Japan, it's 0.1 per 1 million people. So I'm not saying that the United States has more crime than Somalia and the Congo and whatever ridiculous comparison points that he wanted to use. Of course, I'm not saying that. Like, I'm not a moron, man. None of us are saying that. But I'm just saying, in a relative sense to most other rich industrialized countries that have their stuff together, the United States does have a higher homicide rate and gun violence rate than most other countries. That's all I'm saying.
Okay, that's cool. What I want to know is, does anybody else want to ask Artemis? Sorry if I call you that. It's when Junior's
No, that's
failed.
cool, man. You can call me whatever.
Okay. Does anybody else want to ask Artemis a question? If you do, then just say so in general chat, and we'll unmute you so you can ask your question. Sid's Slicer says yes. Right, so we're gonna unmute him and let him ask you a question. Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right. Right, Sids, you're here. You can ask Artemis your question or make your statement, whatever it is you wanted to do.
Oh, I didn't even know we were in the debate channel. I was just wondering what you guys were speaking about, but I guess it's on gun control.
Yeah,
Something
man.
of that nature.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
What are your views on that? Maybe you can, maybe you have some opposing views, or maybe you agree.
Well, I'd like to hear the basis. I guess Genius is advocating for gun control. I've only been here for like a minute, so that's kind of what I'm taking in.
Sure, that's fine. He essentially is advocating for gun control. He and I had a little bit of a discussion earlier on, and it seems like we agree on most stuff. So maybe you have a specific question or something that you want to ask of him.
So, what would be the need for gun control? Like, what's your position on that? Why have gun control in the first place?
So my position actually is pretty similar to SD's position. We found out as we were going through the debate. We both want things like mental health screenings, background checks, stuff like that to make sure that the people getting the weapons, are responsible with them. And the main reason is just to reduce the gun violence rate and the homicide rate. That's the reason why we would take an interest in the subject.
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Mm-hmm.
Who like people that are for guns? Who is advocating against like proper health and mental screenings beforehand? I don't really hear about that.
On here,
Probably
I
me.
don't believe. I don't believe.
Like to me,
any
that's
of
just
this.
a given, you know.
I think Patty did have some views which she was talking about 5 minutes ago, where some mental illnesses, people with mental illnesses should still be able to have guns because otherwise you're infringing on their constitutional rights. But Patty can talk about that. I don't want to speak for her position.
Yeah,
Did
I
she
guess it
mention
would be
autism?
it'd be dependent on the discrepancies, like between like what sort of mental illnesses would prevent you from being able to get a gun. I guess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So is it like all mental illness? Like if you have depression, you're not allowed to get one. Anxiety, you're not allowed to get one. Or like who ultimately decides like what's what at the end of the day?
Yeah. No,
You know
it's a really good question. Especially, actually, I didn't even consider depression because that's a really good point. Because should you be allowed to buy a gun even if there's a likelihood of you killing yourself with that gun? Like should there be a restriction around that?
Well, if someone's committed, they're gonna do it one way or another.
Mm-hmm.
Like the gun is just
a tool.
What like men are way more likely to kill themselves than women, right? When they attempt suicide, and that's because of the method that they do it. Most men will just, I mean, not most men, but men are more inclined to use a gun to kill themselves.
Yep.
Rather than like pills or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, I guess it would just depend. Like, what sort of mental illnesses would you not be allowed to obtain a gun with? Like, what are they exactly looking for in the screenings? Like
in the mental health screenings?
Yeah, well, the issue comes about is like what ultimately decides whether or not you can get one or not.
I believe right now the mental health screenings check for things like, do you have a family history of things like hallucinations, schizophrenia, anything that disconnects you from reality, anything that reduces impulse control, things like that. But like I'm not a doctor. I haven't looked that closely into it, so just take that with a grain of salt.
Yeah, I guess you're not even coming from the position I thought you were. Like, if you're just talking about like mental health screenings and things of that nature, I think those are appropriate and needed. It's just the deciding factor what sort of mental illnesses would like prevent you from obtaining a weapon. That's like I think where you could debate on.
Hmm. And I don't know if you were there 5 minutes ago, but the
No,
one
I
other.
just came in. Yeah.
Oh, okay. So you might find this interesting, but 5 minutes ago, Patty and I were having a discussion, and we had one other disagreement, which is that I think Patty said if a convicted felon has paid their debt to society, they've gone to prison, they've served their time, they should be allowed to get a gun after being released from prison because they're now reformed. They're back in society. They're back in good graces. I personally took the viewpoint that if you're a violent um, felon, like a
Offender.
violent felon,
Yeah.
that you should not ever be allowed to get a gun again because why should we take that risk? Like you've already failed once. Why should we, like, as a precautionary measure, we should not let you get a gun, even if you have gone to prison and served your penance to
Well,
society.
what's the point of prison then?
I would say,
You know,
yeah,
like
I would say two things: probably retribution and rehabilitation. If I
yeah.
have to be honest, I would say those two things.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky subject. Yeah,
Yeah,
because you have a violent offender, like they're probably more inclined to commit another violent crime compared
hmm
to the next person that isn't. But at the
yeah,
same time, they serve time in prison and they paid their dues one way or another.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, I think that's tricky. I don't even know if I could side with either of you on this yet.
No, and honestly, that's exactly what I told Patty as well. I told her, like, this view I have right now, but I could easily change my view in 1 or 2 months. Like it could easily change because it's such a gray kind of area that it's not easy. Like I could make a case for either side of it, to be honest.
Well, because there's a lot of gray areas. Like someone gets, an assault charge from some guy trying to fight him outside the bar, and he ends up becoming a felon because of that. But in reality, the situation. But I guess you got to think about it like on a more general like level of everyone. But like personal accounts, like you get an assault charge and you get a felony from that. But let's say the situation was just kind of messed up in the first place because the judicial system isn't 100% perfect.
Right. Right.
Uh, yeah. So I mean, yeah, I would think it's infringing on your constitutional rights at that point.
Yeah. Yeah. And
And it
you
gets
could be
into a
right.
tricky subject where you start saying, okay, these people are more inclined to do X, therefore we're not going to allow them to do Y. You can
hmm
take that into so many different areas where
Yeah.
I think it just
Yeah,
the
which
government too much power.
is exactly why I'm gonna see if somebody else wants to speak. Not to like impugn your point or anything, but I see we've got Nick Liston in the chat. Nick, did you want to say something? I'll unmute you. Really glad to see you in the chat, mate. Your mic is open if you want to speak.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, hey everybody. It's been a while.
It has been a while. Why didn't you
Yeah.
reply to my DM, man? Don't you like me anymore? Don't you
Oh,
love
you
me
sent
no
me-
more?
I'm very yeah. My disparate etiquette isn't as good as it should be.
Yeah,
My
you suck,
apologies.
but it's alright. Anyway, back on topic. When Genius failed is taking the anti-gun position, so I was wondering if you had a question for him or an opinion that you wanted to share.
Well, I mean, I definitely think that once you've served prison, you definitely need to be able to have a gun. I mean, you should be treated like anyone else. I think that when you start labeling somebody as permanently a certain way, it's a way of kind of creating a what's the word for it? You sort of end up making that thing happen.
Stigmatism.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like if you're identified as someone who can't, if you can't hold responsibly carry a firearm, then you'll always live up to those low expectations. So you'll end up getting a gun almost probably despite society for mistreating you, because it would be mistreatment. I mean, to label someone permanently even after they've gone to prison. So I know I think that's kind of a no-brainer.
Yeah. I'm sort of on the other side, man. I just take the cautionary step of saying, listen, they've already committed violence and killed someone once. Like, let's just take the example of somebody who's killed someone, right? They've gone to prison, they've served their time, which is good. But they've already done it once. I don't want to risk it making it easier for them to do it a second time. They can still always do it again. They can use knives, they can use a vehicle, they can always still commit the action. Like, I mean, there's no way we can police them 100% of the time, but I don't think we should make it easier on them to commit the action. But again, I could change my opinion on this in the future.
I mean, look, there's part of living in a free society is certain risks, and that's unfortunately maybe one of the risks we have to take is to allow someone to have a gun who is more likely to shoot someone with it.
Correct, exactly, and that it just comes down to a value difference, man. Like,
but
it's worthwhile taking the risk. I don't.
Yeah, okay, fine. Then let's never give any men guns and only give women guns because women are probably less likely to shoot people than men are. I mean, it's like,
Yeah, but that's a straw man, man. Like, I never said we have to go that far.
The thing with Nick that you probably don't realize is he likes to have guns because he likes to just kill animals for no reason. I mean,
Oh, right. Yeah, that's right. I forgot to mention that.
Yeah. And we did speak about hunting, and hunting was something SD and I both agreed.
Yeah, I'm taking the piss out of Nick, and he doesn't mind. He's a vegan. So.
No, I thought Nick uses his guns to kill monkeys or something like that.
Right. I have darted monkeys before.
Oh, you have?
Yeah.
Disgusting.
I'm a pretty good shot actually. When I back when I used to run that sanctuary, we had a couple escapes, and I had to learn how to shoot monkeys from a distance with these dart guns. But
imagine just shooting monkeys from a distance. I mean, what kind of vegan are you, man?
Yeah, the worst part is that when you're doing it, there's a sort of like, it's a weird feeling because you kind of get into this hunting mode, and you can you sort of channel this kind of aggression. It actually you lose your empathy, and it actually feels kind of good. And that's it's kind of a creepy thing to discover about yourself. Excuse me. But yeah, yeah. I don't know. I guess I don't really have a lot. I'm just generally just pro gun. I think people should be able to have these weapons. So I don't really have a very nuanced position on this, I don't think.
Me too. I'm pro gun as well. And what I want to do just before we're going to keep going, but I'm going to end the live stream. So I do want to thank Artemis for coming in and having this discussion, because he didn't have to do that. That was nice of him.
Yeah, thank you, SD. This was fun.
Yeah, anytime you want to discuss anything, that's fine. All I'm going to do is chop off the YouTube live stream. The Discord chat is going to keep on going. So, yeah, feel free to carry on. And thank you once again for popping in.
Definitely. Thank you.